For decades, the Russian political system has been presented as monolithic, a structure centered around a single leader, reinforced by loyalty, patronage, and fear. Yet according to our sources in Moscow, cracks are beginning to appear at the very top. In private conversations, members of the elite, once considered unshakable pillars of support, now question the path the country has taken. What was unthinkable only a few years ago is whispered more openly today, that the interests of the elite and the interests of the Kremlin may no longer align. Officially, of course, unity is emphasized. State media portrays a leadership fully in control, facing external challenges with confidence. But insiders describe a different reality, one of closed-door disputes, financial anxieties, and mounting frustrations. Analysts in expert circles go so far as to call it a shocking twist, the possibility that the very system designed to secure loyalty is breeding dissent. The sources of this tension are multiple. Sanctions have cut off access to Western markets, homes, and assets once taken for granted by wealthy Russians. Private jets grounded, villas frozen, accounts blocked. These are not abstract political measures but personal losses felt directly by those closest to power. For years, loyalty was sustained by wealth and privilege. Now, with those privileges eroded, the cost of loyalty rises while the benefits shrink. Observers stress that this transformation is subtle but decisive. The elite do not protest in the streets, but their dissatisfaction emerges in whispers, in hesitant decisions, in cautious refusals to invest. Each act may appear minor, but together they reveal a mood shift. Economic pressures deepen the strain. Russia's budget faces growing deficits as oil revenues fall and costs from the war effort expand. To fill the gap, the state leans more heavily on domestic businesses and oligarchs, demanding higher taxes, mandatory contributions, and voluntary donations. Insiders describe executives grumbling privately. Once beneficiaries of state patronage, they now feel like targets of extraction. "We built our wealth within the system," one businessman reportedly said behind closed doors, "and now the system consumes it." Such sentiments, even if expressed quietly, mark a departure from the uncritical loyalty of the past. Analysts underline that this is the essence of the twist. The relationship between ruler and elite, once mutually beneficial, now appears one-sided. Political dynamics add to the unease. The longer the conflict drags on, the less predictable the future becomes. Members of the elite who once assumed stability now confront uncertainty. Will their assets survive? Will their influence endure? Will their families remain safe? These questions, whispered at private dinners and in discreet phone calls, reveal cracks in the confidence that once defined the Kremlin's inner circle. Some insiders suggest that alternative visions of the future are quietly discussed, not openly, not in opposition, but in cautious hypotheticals. What if scenarios that once seemed treasonous now emerge as part of ordinary conversation? Experts stress that such conversations matter. They signal that the aura of inevitability around one man's leadership is no longer absolute. International observers notice these shifts. Western intelligence reports suggest increased chatter within Russian business and political circles about potential changes in leadership or policy. While these discussions remain speculative, their very existence indicates a transformation. For years, the elite derived security from presenting unity. Now, by entertaining alternatives, they reveal doubt. Diplomats underline that perception is critical. Even rumors of division weaken Moscow's image abroad. Allies and adversaries alike watch carefully, interpreting each signal as evidence of vulnerability. And perception, once shifted, can create its own momentum. The irony is clear. The same system that concentrated power so tightly has made the consequences of disloyalty seem catastrophic, but it has also made the burden of loyalty increasingly heavy. For the elite, silence and compliance no longer guarantee prosperity. Instead, they mean bearing costs without clear benefits. Observers underline that this is why insiders describe the current moment as a turning point. The foundations of loyalty are shifting, and with them, the stability of the system itself. For those who want to keep following how these subtle fractures may transform not only Russia's political system but also the balance of power globally, subscribing will ensure you remain close to the analysis that reveals what official statements are designed to conceal. In private discussions across Moscow's financial and political circles, the language has begun to shift. A few years ago, any expression of doubt regarding the leadership was considered both unwise and unthinkable. Today, insiders report that even in carefully monitored environments, guarded phrases are slipping through. How long can this continue, or what happens after? These are not open challenges, but they are cracks in the discipline of silence. Analysts stress that the significance lies not in the words themselves but in their normalization. Once whispered only abroad or in absolute secrecy, such doubts now circulate quietly within the capital. This indicates a profound change. fear is no longer absolute, and certainty in the leadership's permanence is no longer guaranteed. The causes are deeply rooted in economics. Sanctions have restricted access to global markets, blocked investments, and cut off elite families from the lifestyles they once enjoyed. According to sources close to major corporations, frustration is mounting as opportunities shrink. For oligarchs whose wealth depended on integration with international finance, the sudden isolation feels like a cage. Businesses accustomed to leveraging Western technology, legal systems, and credit now face shortages and inefficiencies. These limitations erode not only profits but also prestige. One executive, speaking off the record, described it as living in a fortress that keeps shrinking. Such sentiments, repeated across boardrooms and private residences, gradually accumulate into discontent. The government's reliance on extraction deepens this divide. With revenues falling, the Kremlin demands ever more from domestic companies: higher taxes, larger contributions, and compliance with state directives. Insiders reveal that some firms have been compelled to sell assets at unfavorable terms or to finance projects with little economic value but high political symbolism. These pressures create resentment, even among those who owe their fortunes to the system. Analysts explain that loyalty built on prosperity is fragile when prosperity vanishes. Without incentives, loyalty becomes obligation, and obligation breeds frustration. It is this transformation, from mutually beneficial arrangement to coerced compliance, that marks the shift now visible. Political risks add another layer. The continuation of the war, with its uncertain timeline and growing costs, intensifies fears among elites. Each new sanction package, each international rebuke, each battlefield loss contributes to a sense of unpredictability. In elite circles, unpredictability is poison. Wealth thrives on stability, not volatility. Insiders note that families of high-ranking figures quietly relocate assets and relatives abroad, even as official rhetoric condemns such moves. This duality, public loyalty, private hedging, illustrates the growing gap between appearance and reality. Experts stress that when elites act in ways that contradict their public positions, it signals declining confidence in the system's long-term sustainability. International actors interpret these movements carefully. Intelligence services in Europe and the United States report increased chatter about elite dissatisfaction, though they caution against assuming immediate consequences. History shows that elite fractures often remain hidden until a sudden trigger makes them visible. For now, the Kremlin maintains its image of unity, but external observers treat reports of discontent as early warning signals. The system is still intact, one diplomat observed, but the foundation looks less solid than before. Such assessments circulate widely in foreign capitals, shaping strategies and expectations. Within Russia, this fragility is reflected in subtle behavior. Some officials grow more cautious in public appearances, limiting bold statements. Others avoid responsibility for controversial policies, preferring to remain in the background. Analysts describe this as distancing through silence, a way to signal unease without direct confrontation. Meanwhile, those most dependent on the system double down, offering loud affirmations of loyalty in hopes of securing protection. This divergence, between hesitant silence and exaggerated loyalty, is itself a sign of instability. In a truly unified elite, behavior is consistent. In a strained elite, it begins to fracture. The economic landscape reinforces the trend. Inflation, currency volatility, and shrinking investment create an environment in which even the wealthiest feel constrained. Private luxury, once a shield against political turbulence, has been compromised by asset freezes and travel bans. For many, the reality is stark: the privileges that justified loyalty no longer exist in the same form. Without these privileges, loyalty transforms into burden. This shift, insiders suggest, is fueling not open rebellion but quiet withdrawal, less investment, less enthusiasm, less energy devoted to sustaining the narrative. Analysts underline that erosion often precedes rupture. The signs may be invisible to the public, but they are clear to those who watch the behavior of elites. Observers stress that the most significant change is psychological. For years, the elite believed that the leadership was unassailable, that resistance was futile, and that stability was guaranteed. Today, that belief is no longer absolute. The mere possibility of change, even whispered cautiously, alters calculations. It encourages hedging, fuels quiet dissent, and opens the door to scenarios previously unimaginable. Whether this leads to open rupture or remains confined to whispers, the twist is already unfolding. Loyalty, once unquestioned, is now conditional. The most striking feature of the current moment is not open confrontation but quiet disengagement. According to our sources, members of the Russian elite no longer rush to demonstrate loyalty as they once did. In earlier years, public affirmations of support were frequent and effusive. Today, some of those affirmations have grown muted, more formulaic, more perfunctory. Analysts underline that this change in tone is revealing. Silence, in such a system, speaks louder than words. When individuals who once competed to display devotion now limit themselves to minimal gestures, it signals a shift in mood. It is not rebellion, but it is distance. And distance, in elite politics, can be as dangerous as opposition. The causes of this distance are cumulative. Economic pain, sanctions, and political uncertainty form part of the story. But insiders also point to personal security. In the past, elite families lived abroad, invested abroad, and educated their children abroad. That safety valve has largely closed. Travel restrictions, frozen assets, and reputational damage have trapped many inside Russia's borders. For individuals who once considered themselves global, this feels like confinement. One senior figure, speaking in private, reportedly described the experience as a gilded cage that grows smaller by the day. Analysts suggest that this sense of entrapment, more than financial loss alone, fuels frustration. At the same time, the state demands greater contributions from those very elites. Extra taxes, voluntary donations, and compulsory investments in state projects have become routine. Executives describe being compelled to fund initiatives with little commercial value but high symbolic importance. The dynamic resembles extraction rather than partnership. The leadership portrays this as patriotic duty. The elites increasingly see it as confiscation. This tension is rarely visible in public, but it shapes behavior. Investment slows, projects stall, and energy drains away from the system. What emerges is not open revolt but a quiet refusal to carry the same enthusiasm as before. Political observers highlight the role of uncertainty. The future of the war remains unclear, as does the trajectory of international isolation. For elites whose wealth and influence depend on long-term planning, uncertainty is corrosive. They cannot calculate risks, cannot predict opportunities, cannot plan for succession. As a result, they hedge, moving assets into safer forms, creating contingency plans, and quietly discussing what-if scenarios. Analysts explain that such hedging is itself a form of withdrawal. It signals reduced confidence in the stability of the leadership, even if no one dares articulate it openly. This hedging, multiplied across dozens of individuals, accumulates into a collective mood of caution and fatigue. Internationally, these shifts are not invisible. Western intelligence assessments increasingly point to divisions within Russia's elite. While none of these divisions have yet translated into open confrontation, their existence is significant. For decades, the Kremlin's strength lay in the perception of absolute unity. That perception, once lost, cannot easily be restored. Diplomats stress that even rumors of elite discontent weaken Moscow's image abroad. Partners and adversaries alike interpret them as signs of vulnerability. And vulnerability, once perceived, shapes negotiations, alliances, and strategies. Inside Russia, the tension manifests in subtle changes. Some figures avoid public appearances, preferring to remain in the shadows. Others, sensing opportunity, position themselves cautiously for the future, offering carefully worded statements that emphasize resilience but avoid direct praise. Analysts call this positioning through ambiguity, a way of remaining loyal to the present while preparing for possible alternatives. This ambiguity, once rare, is becoming more common. It reflects not betrayal but pragmatism. In a system where certainty fades, ambiguity becomes survival. Observers underline that the turning point lies not in dramatic announcements but in psychology. The idea that loyalty is permanent has been replaced by the idea that loyalty is conditional. Elites now weigh costs against benefits, risks against rewards. And once such calculations begin, the foundation of unquestioned obedience is gone. Whether this leads to rupture or simply to stagnation, the twist is undeniable: the system is no longer as cohesive as it appears. For those seeking to understand how this hidden erosion of unity could reshape not only Russia's internal dynamics but also its role on the global stage, subscribing will ensure that you continue to receive analysis that cuts beneath the surface, connecting the subtle signals that define tomorrow's headlines. International analysts observing Moscow note that the most dangerous fractures in authoritarian systems rarely appear on the surface. For decades, Russia's political structure has relied on two pillars: loyalty at the top and obedience at the bottom. The public could be managed through media control, but the elite were kept loyal through wealth, privileges, and security. Now, insiders stress that all three of those foundations are under pressure. Wealth has been reduced by sanctions and asset freezes. Privileges such as global travel, international investment, and prestige have eroded. Security, once guaranteed by unity, now feels uncertain as the future of the war and the economy remains unpredictable. When these three guarantees weaken simultaneously, the calculus of loyalty shifts dramatically. Within Moscow, subtle signals illustrate this recalibration. Elite families discreetly move children to neutral countries, often through indirect routes. Business assets are transferred into more opaque structures, designed to preserve flexibility. Charitable donations and voluntary contributions to state projects are made with visible reluctance, sometimes delayed until direct pressure is applied. These behaviors suggest not rebellion but preparation for scenarios in which the current arrangement no longer holds. Observers underline that such preparation is itself a form of dissent. It indicates that the belief in permanence has weakened. The government responds by doubling down on control. According to insiders, surveillance of elite communications has increased sharply. Travel is monitored, financial transfers scrutinized, and personal meetings discreetly reported. These measures, intended to deter disloyalty, often produce the opposite effect. Fear reinforces caution, but it also erodes trust. When every conversation is suspect and every transfer questioned, collaboration gives way to suspicion. Analysts compare this dynamic to historical precedents in which regimes survived on fear long after loyalty had dissolved. Fear may prolong stability, but it rarely rebuilds it. The economic environment accelerates the strain. The Russian budget, increasingly dependent on domestic extraction, has turned the elite into a revenue source. Mandatory contributions, higher taxes, and forced participation in state programs have become routine. For oligarchs, this represents a reversal. Instead of receiving patronage from the state, they now subsidize it. This inversion undermines the original logic of loyalty. Executives whisper that they are being punished for their success, targeted precisely because they remain profitable. Such perceptions, even if not voiced publicly, shape attitudes. Resentment may not lead to collective action, but it fosters disengagement. Less energy is devoted to sustaining the system, more to preserving personal survival. Observers highlight the importance of perception. Even small gestures, a businessman delaying investment, a governor avoiding public enthusiasm, an official offering cautious rather than effusive praise, accumulate into a broader impression of hesitation. Hesitation is contagious. In a system that depends on momentum and confidence, hesitation spreads like a crack through glass. For now, the crack remains thin, but analysts warn that it can widen quickly under pressure. A sudden external shock, a battlefield loss, a financial collapse, or an unexpected political scandal could turn hesitation into fracture. This is why international observers watch closely for subtle changes in tone and behavior among Russia's elite. Diplomatically, these signs are significant. Foreign governments have long treated Moscow as a monolith, assuming that decisions flowed seamlessly from the top downward. Now, reports of elite dissatisfaction suggest otherwise. This perception influences policy. Some capitals may increase pressure, hoping that elite divisions weaken the system further. Others may explore back-channel communications, sensing that not all within the Russian establishment are equally aligned. Whether accurate or not, the perception of division changes international strategies. In global politics, the idea of unity can be as powerful as unity itself. When the idea fades, influence erodes. Inside Russia, the contradiction deepens. Publicly, the leadership projects absolute confidence. State television repeats the narrative of control and resilience. Yet in private, elites take precautions, hedge bets, and prepare contingencies. The gap between public display and private reality widens. Observers stress that this gap is unsustainable in the long run. Systems can survive contradiction temporarily, but over time, reality asserts itself. Citizens begin to notice when officials act differently than they speak. Elites begin to sense that they are not alone in their doubts. Each recognition weakens the cohesion further. The essence of the current moment lies in the transformation of loyalty. What was once automatic now requires justification. What was once given freely now feels extracted. And what was once considered permanent is now conditional. This conditionality, still invisible to the broader public, defines the shocking twist that experts describe. It does not mean open revolt, but it means that the system is no longer what it once was. And in systems built on perception as much as on power, such a shift carries consequences that extend far beyond boardrooms and private conversations. Looking ahead, analysts outline several possible outcomes, none of which offer the certainty the Kremlin once projected. In the first scenario, the current strain is contained. Surveillance, pressure, and selective rewards keep the elite in line, preventing open dissent. History suggests that such systems can endure for years even when cracks are visible. Yet endurance under pressure often comes at the cost of vitality. The elite may remain formally loyal, but their energy is spent on survival rather than innovation or investment. Over time, this produces stagnation, a system that appears stable but quietly decays from within. A second scenario is more disruptive. If economic pressures intensify, or if the war produces unexpected shocks, the cohesion of the elite could falter more dramatically. Analysts describe this not as a coup in the traditional sense but as a withdrawal of participation. Elites may stop carrying out orders with enthusiasm, slow the flow of funds, or decline to defend the leadership in critical moments. Such passive resistance can be as dangerous as active opposition, because it deprives the system of the support it needs to function. In this scenario, loyalty fades not with dramatic gestures but with silence and absence. A third scenario involves transformation. Some insiders speculate that new figures within the elite may seek to position themselves as alternatives, offering continuity without the burdens of the current course. These figures may not articulate opposition openly, but they prepare for a moment when circumstances shift. Analysts underline that systems concentrated around a single leader are particularly vulnerable to such dynamics. Once the idea of permanence is questioned, alternatives begin to appear, even if only in whispers. The very existence of those whispers marks a break from the past. International observers emphasize that perception will play a decisive role. If foreign capitals come to believe that Moscow's elite are divided, it shapes policy choices. Pressure may increase, negotiations may change tone, and partners may hedge their relationships. Conversely, if the elite manage to maintain an outward image of unity, even fractured loyalty may be sufficient to preserve influence abroad. This interplay between appearance and reality defines much of modern geopolitics. Analysts stress that Russia now finds itself caught between the two, projecting strength while insiders prepare for uncertainty. Within Russia, the psychological shift may prove the most consequential. For decades, the elite and the public alike accepted the leadership's permanence as a given. That belief acted as an anchor, discouraging resistance and reinforcing compliance. Once the anchor moves, even slightly, the entire structure becomes more fluid. Experts caution that this does not guarantee immediate change, but it alters the horizon. Possibilities that were once dismissed as fantasy become part of calculation. And when calculations change, behavior follows. The ultimate irony, observers note, is that the very system designed to ensure total loyalty may have sown the seeds of its own instability. By concentrating wealth, privilege, and security in the hands of a narrow circle, it tied loyalty to those benefits. When the benefits erode, so does the loyalty. This is the essence of the shocking twist. The elite who once sustained the system now question its cost. They may not yet act openly, but their silence, hesitation, and hedging speak volumes. As this quiet shift unfolds, its consequences will not remain confined to Moscow. They will ripple outward, affecting energy markets, alliances, and the balance of power far beyond Russia's borders. The world has learned many times that change at the top of authoritarian systems often begins invisibly, in whispers behind closed doors, long before it becomes visible in headlines. Whether Russia faces stagnation, subtle transformation, or sudden fracture, the signs are already emerging. And those who observe them closely see a future that is far less certain than the past once seemed. For those who want to follow how these hidden fractures evolve, reshaping not only the Kremlin's inner circle but also global politics and economics, subscribing will ensure you remain connected to the deeper analysis, beyond official narratives and surface appearances.